The night they slid the letter under my door, I knew it wasn't really about guns. It was about power. The paper trembled in my hands as I read the words again and again, my pulse thudding louder than the rain outside, louder than the echoes of a life I thought I had already survived. Notice of prohibition, it said, dressed up in polite language, legal phrases sharp as knives. According to my HOA, I was now banned from owning firearms within the community. Not restricted, not reviewed, banned. I laughed at first, a short, hollow sound that died in my throat. I'd survived Fallujah. I'd buried friends whose names still woke me up at night. And now a man in a pressed shirt with a clipboard thought he could erase a part of who I was. That was the moment I promised myself something in the dark, something cold and steady. If they wanted a war, they'd get one. Not with bullets, with truth. And I would make it hurt. I'm an ex-Marine. Once you earn that title, it never really leaves you. The Corps carved discipline into my bones and taught me how to endure when everything else falls apart. After I came home, after the uniform was folded and stored away, I wanted something simple, quiet, a place with clean sidewalks, trimmed lawns, rules that promised order. That's how I ended up in this neighborhood, tucked behind brick gates and manicured hedges, governed by an HOA that smiled too much and watched too closely. At first it felt safe, too safe maybe, but I told myself that was the point. I didn't know then that safety can be just another word for control. The villain of this story wore khakis and a smug grin. His name was Carter Blake, the HOA compliance officer. He introduced himself like a politician, all firm handshakes and fake concern. "We just want harmony," he said, the first time he knocked on my door to complain about my flagpole being an inch too tall. His eyes lingered on the Marine Corps emblem by my door, on the faded tattoo creeping out from my sleeve. He smiled, but there was something else there too. Fear, maybe, or envy. Men like him don't like reminders that there are people in the world who have faced real consequences, who can't be intimidated by laminated rulebooks. It started small, a warning about my pickup truck, a fine for leaving trash cans out too long. Each notice slid under my door felt like a test. I paid them, adjusted, stayed polite. Marines learn patience. But patience has limits. One afternoon, Carter caught me in my driveway and casually mentioned that some neighbors were uncomfortable knowing I legally owned firearms. I remember the way he said it, like it was a confession wrapped in gossip. "This is a family community," he added, as if families and freedom were mutually exclusive. I told him my guns were stored safely, legally, and were none of his business. His smile tightened. That was the first shot fired, even if no one else heard it. The letter came a week later. The HOA claimed a bylaw interpretation allowed them to prohibit firearms within the community. They cited safety, fear, the collective good. They did not cite the Constitution. They did not cite reality. They relied on intimidation, on the assumption that I'd fold, sell my guns, apologize for existing. I sat alone at my kitchen table, the letters spread out before me, memories rising like ghosts. I thought of my brothers who never came home, of the oath I swore, of the rights we were told we were defending. Rage flared, hot and dangerous, but Marines don't act on rage. We plan. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call the police. That would have been too easy, too clean. Carter wanted to make an example out of me, and I decided I'd let him, just not the way he expected. I began by listening. I attended HOA meetings and sat in the back, quiet, watching. Carter loved the spotlight. He loved the sound of his own voice amplified through cheap speakers. I watched how board members deferred to him, how residents nodded along, afraid to stand out. Fear is a powerful tool, but it cuts both ways. At night, I lay awake, the ceiling fan slicing the air, my mind working like it used to on deployment. Identify the objective, understand the enemy, use their weaknesses. Carter's weakness was arrogance. He believed rules made him untouchable. He believed I was alone. He was wrong on both counts. I started talking to neighbors, not about guns, but about fines, about letters, about the quiet resentment simmering behind closed doors. Mrs. Alvarez down the street had been fined for planting the wrong flowers. A young couple had been threatened over a kid's chalk drawing on the sidewalk. Everywhere I went, I found the same thing. People feeling small, controlled, tired. I didn't push. I listened. I let them talk. Trust is earned slowly, one conversation at a time.
Carter escalated. He sent follow-up notices, warnings about inspections, vague threats about further action if I didn't comply. Each one went into a folder. Date, time, signature. Marines document everything. He didn't know that every smug email, every overreach was ammunition of a different kind. The suspense built inside me, a quiet tension that sharpened my focus. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about a pattern, about a man who had confused authority with entitlement. The day Carter came to my door with 2 board members, I knew the end game was approaching. He stood on my porch like he owned it, papers in hand, voice dripping with condescension. "This is your final notice," he said. "Failure to comply will result in severe consequences." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not a powerful man, but a scared one. Scared of losing control, scared of being exposed. I nodded, thanked him for his time, and closed the door gently. Inside, my hands were shaking, but not with fear, with anticipation. What Carter didn't know was that the HOA bylaws he wielded like a weapon were riddled with contradictions. He had been selectively enforcing rules, ignoring procedures when it suited him. He had overstepped repeatedly, and I had the proof. I spent nights poring over documents, highlighting sections, cross-referencing amendments. It felt like another kind of battlefield, quieter but just as dangerous. Suspense isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the slow tightening of a net. I began to act, not openly, subtly. I shared information with neighbors, carefully, anonymously at first. I encouraged them to read the bylaws themselves, to ask questions at meetings. The tone shifted. Carter noticed. His speeches grew sharper, his smiles thinner. He sensed something slipping, but he couldn't see it yet. That's the thing about revenge done right. The target feels it before they understand it. The night before the big HOA meeting, I barely slept. Memories of combat mixed with visions of Carter's shocked face. I wasn't afraid of confrontation. I was afraid of failing the people who had quietly placed their trust in me. At dawn, I stood in my living room looking at the folded flag in its case, at the medals tucked away in a drawer. I whispered a promise to myself. Stay calm, stay disciplined, finish the mission. The meeting room was packed. That alone was unusual. Carter stood at the front, confident, oblivious. When the agenda reached community safety, he launched into his prepared speech, using words like threat and responsibility, never once looking at me. When he finished, I stood up. The room went silent. Every eye turned. My heart hammered, but my voice was steady. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I asked questions, simple ones, about authority, about process, about consistency. I cited bylaws, dates, his own emails. One by one, his answers faltered. Murmurs rippled through the room. Suspense thickened the air. Carter's face flushed. He tried to regain control, to talk over me, but it was too late. Others stood up. Mrs. Alvarez, the young couple. Voices joined mine, a chorus of quiet frustration finally breaking free. This was my strike. Not with a weapon, but with light. Carter lashed out, threatened, tried to adjourn the meeting. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time, they saw him not as an enforcer, but as a liability. The power dynamic shifted, subtle but undeniable. I watched it happen, a strange calm settling over me. This was what taking ground felt like now. In the days that followed, Carter unraveled. Emails grew unhinged, notices contradicted each other. Neighbors filed formal complaints, citing the same evidence I had shared. I stayed in the background, letting momentum build. Revenge isn't about spectacle, it's about inevitability. Carter called me once late at night, his voice tight. "What do you want?" he asked. I almost laughed. "I want you to follow the rules you're so fond of," and hung up. The HOA held a vote. Carter was removed from his position pending review. The ban on firearms was quietly rescinded, labeled a misinterpretation. No apology, no admission. They hoped it would all fade away. But Carter's reputation was done. In a community built on perception, that was everything. I watched him pack up his office one afternoon, his shoulders slumped, his power gone. He didn't look at me. I didn't feel triumph the way I thought I might. What I felt was release. The tension that had coiled inside me for months finally eased. I had taken revenge, yes, but not in the way movies portray. No fists, no blood, just resolve, patience, and the refusal to be erased. The Second Amendment didn't strike back with violence. It struck back with awareness, with community, with the reminder that rights don't vanish just because someone with a badge and a clipboard says so.
Sometimes, late at night, I still think about how close I came to letting anger lead me somewhere darker. Being a Marine taught me how to fight, but this taught me when not to. Suspense isn't just about what happens next. It's about the choice you make when you're pushed to the edge. Carter wanted fear. I gave him accountability. And in the end, that was far more devastating. The neighborhood is quieter now. Not the forced quiet of compliance, but the kind that comes when people feel heard. I walk my dog past trimmed lawns and waving flags, and I know some neighbors look at me differently. Not with fear, but with respect. I didn't win because I was stronger. I won because I refused to disappear. And if there's one thing the Marines never taught me, but life did, it's this. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply standing your ground and letting the truth do the damage.
The story didn't end when Carter packed his boxes and disappeared from the office. That was only the moment everyone else thought it was over. For me, it was the moment the real tension began to settle in. The kind that doesn't scream but hums low in your chest, reminding you that wounded men don't always walk away quietly. For weeks after his removal, I felt eyes on me. Not imaginary ones. Real pauses in conversations when I walked past. Cars slowing just a little too much near my driveway. Carter had lost his title, but not his pride, and men like him don't forgive humiliation. They collect it. I knew that instinctively, the same way I once knew when a street overseas was about to turn deadly. Calm before the shift, before retaliation. One evening, I came home to find my garage door wide open. Nothing was missing. That's what made it worse. My gun safe was untouched, my tools still lined up, but the message was clear. Someone had been inside. My pulse spiked, muscles tightening, Marine reflexes snapping awake. I stood there for a long moment, breathing slowly, scanning every shadow. Fear tried to creep in, but I pushed it back down. Fear clouds judgment. Suspense sharpens it. I didn't call anyone. I closed the door, locked up, and sat in the dark living room, letting the silence speak. Carter wasn't done. He was trying to remind me that he still existed. That was his mistake, because now he'd crossed from paperwork into personal space, and once that line is crossed, the rules change. The next few days, small things started happening. Anonymous complaints against me resurfaced, all rejected but irritating. Someone scratched the side of my truck with a key, deep enough to be deliberate. Notes appeared in my mailbox without postage, no words, just blank paper folded once. Psychological pressure. He wanted me jumpy, wanted me to slip. I smiled when I found the last one. That told me everything. He was improvising. Desperate men make mistakes. At night, memories came back stronger. The sand, the noise, the feeling of being hunted and hunting at the same time. I hated that part of myself, the part that woke up calm and alert when danger crept close. I had tried to bury it in normal life, in lawns and bylaws and polite smiles. Carter had dug it back up. I started watching again, not openly. Patterns, times, who walked their dog late, which cars didn't belong. Carter still lived nearby, just outside the community boundary. I never approached him. I didn't need to. I needed to understand him. He had gone from authority to outsider overnight, and that kind of fall twists people. He wanted control back. He wanted revenge, which meant he'd take risks. One night around 2 a.m., I saw his car idling at the corner, lights off, just sitting there, waiting. I stood behind my curtain, heart steady, counting seconds. Marines are trained to wait longer than fear can survive. After a while, the car pulled away. I didn't move. I let him wonder if I'd seen him. Suspense works both ways. I began my final move the next morning. Carter had always relied on intimidation in private, never on record. That's how men like him operate. But anger makes people sloppy. I left my garage door open, again, just slightly, the way I knew would catch his attention. I parked my truck crooked, made it look like I was distracted, vulnerable, bait. That night, he took it. I heard the footsteps before I saw him, soft, careful. The door creaked. I stayed still, hidden in the shadows, breathing slow, every sense alive.
He froze when he saw me step into the light. The look on his face wasn't rage, it was shock. He hadn't expected me to be waiting. "You ruined me," he hissed, hands shaking. "You think you're some hero?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move closer. I let the silence stretch, let his own words echo back at him. "You did this to yourself," I said quietly. "I just stopped you." That's what he snapped. He lunged forward, not with strength, but with desperation. I blocked him easily, guided his momentum past me just enough to make him stumble. No punches, no theatrics. Control. He realized then how outmatched he was, not physically, but mentally. That fear bloomed in his eyes, raw and unmistakable. I leaned in close enough for him to hear my breathing. "You came onto my property again. You keep pushing, and the story ends badly for you. Not because I hurt you, but because you won't stop hurting yourself." I stepped back and pointed at the door. "Leave, and don't come back." He stood there for a long second, chest heaving, humiliation burning brighter than anger. Then he turned and ran. Not walked, ran. After that night, it stopped. No more cars, no more notes, no more scratches. Carter vanished from the edges of my life completely. I later heard he'd moved, taken a job far away, somewhere no one knew the story. He never spoke my name again. He didn't need to. He carried it with him. I didn't celebrate. I didn't brag. I went back to quiet mornings and trimmed lawns. But the quiet felt different now. Earned. Solid. The kind that comes after you face something instead of running from it. Sometimes people think revenge has to be loud to be satisfying, that it needs headlines or handcuffs or blood. They're wrong. Real revenge is when the person who tried to erase you ends up erasing themselves from your life completely. When they lose power not because you took it violently, but because you proved they never deserved it. I still own my firearms, legally, responsibly. But more than that, I own my ground, my space, my dignity. Carter tried to turn fear into a weapon. I turned patience into a blade. And when it was over, I didn't feel anger anymore, just a steady calm. Because some wars aren't fought to destroy the enemy. They're fought to remind the world, and yourself, that you were never powerless to begin with.
The calm didn't come all at once. It never does. It settled in slowly, like dust after an explosion, and for a while I didn't trust it. I'd lived long enough knowing that silence can lie. Too quiet usually means something is regrouping. Weeks passed, then months. The seasons shifted, leaves turning brittle and brown, the air sharpening at night. Life in the neighborhood went on, but something underneath it had changed. People stood a little straighter. Conversations at mailboxes lasted longer. The HOA meetings, once stiff and scripted, turned cautious, almost respectful. No one said my name directly, but I felt it in the pauses, in the way eyes flicked toward me and then away. I hadn't asked to become anything to anyone, but pressure creates symbols whether you want them or not. And still, I stayed alert. Being an ex-Marine doesn't mean you live in paranoia. It means you understand patterns. You understand that threats don't always come from the direction you expect, and they don't always wear the same face. Carter was gone, but the system that created him was still breathing, and systems don't like losing control. The first sign came in the form of a rumor. I heard it from a neighbor who stopped me during an evening walk, voice low, eyes nervous. Someone was saying I was unstable, that I had threatened people, that I was stockpiling weapons. Old tactics, recycled fear. Carter's fingerprints were all over it, even if he wasn't physically present anymore. This was his last card. If he couldn't enforce authority, he'd poison perception. That kind of lie is dangerous, not because it's loud, but because it spreads quietly, reshaping reality one whisper at a time. I didn't confront it. I didn't deny it publicly. Denial gives lies oxygen. Instead, I did what Marines do best. I prepared for contact. I started inviting neighbors over. Not meetings, barbecues, coffee, normal life. I let them see me as I was, not as a story someone else wanted to tell. A man who worked,
who laughed occasionally, who carried his past without letting it spill everywhere. The rumors lost traction fast. Fear can't survive proximity for long. But someone else noticed. One night, I found a camera pointed toward my house. Cheap, hidden badly in the shrubs across the street. That crossed a different line. Surveillance isn't rumor, it's intent. I removed it without ceremony and left it on the HOA office desk the next morning. No note, no threat, just a silent message. I see what you're doing. The board looked shaken. They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. Power respects awareness more than anger. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. A week later, my house was vandalized. Not destroyed, marked. Red paint sprayed across my garage door in a symbol that meant nothing specific, but everything emotionally. It was meant to provoke, to turn me into the monster they'd been whispering about. I stood there staring at it as neighbors gathered, shock and discomfort thick in the air. I could feel the weight of expectation pressing down, everyone waiting to see how I'd react. I breathed in slowly, counted, exhaled. Then I cleaned it myself. No police, no dramatic statements, just work. By sunset, the paint was gone, the message erased. That confused them more than any outburst could have. People who thrive on chaos don't know how to fight restraint. That night, I finally understood the real endgame. This wasn't about guns anymore. It wasn't even about me. It was about control slipping through cracks too wide to patch. Carter had been a symptom. The HOA, the fear, the rules bent into weapons, that was the disease. And I decided to finish it. I began documenting everything again, but this time not quietly. I encouraged others to do the same, shared templates, showed them how to record interactions, how to ask for written explanations, how to slow the machinery by forcing it to follow its own rules. It wasn't rebellion, it was discipline, the kind that grinds down abuse by refusing to let it hide. Meetings stretched longer, decisions stalled. The board members grew tired, exposed, uncomfortable. Authority feels powerful only when it moves fast and unchallenged. Once every action requires accountability, power becomes heavy. Then came the vote. Not about guns, not about me, about restructuring the HOA entirely, limiting enforcement authority, requiring transparency, rotating officers. The room was packed again, more than ever. The tension in that space felt heavier than the night Carter had been removed. This wasn't one man falling. This was an entire culture being questioned. I didn't speak much. I didn't need to. Others did, voices steady, informed, no longer afraid. That was the real strike. Not mine alone, but multiplied. When the vote passed, narrowly but decisively, something invisible broke. You could feel it, like a chain snapping under too much strain. Afterward, someone asked me if I felt victorious. I didn't answer right away. Victory implies an enemy left standing to be defeated. What I felt was closure, the kind you earn when you face something head-on and don't let it turn you into what you hate. Carter never resurfaced. No letters, no shadows, no retaliation. Whatever fire that driv him burned out somewhere else where no one was watching. And that was fine. I didn't need him to suffer. I needed him gone. Now when I sit on my porch at night, the air cool and quiet, I think about how close this all came to going another way, how easy it would have been to let anger take the wheel, how tempting it was to fight fear with fear. But Marines are taught something deeper than combat. We're taught control, of ourselves first. The suspense didn't end with a bang. It dissolved, slowly, peacefully, and that, more than anything, felt earned. Because sometimes the strongest way to strike back isn't to destroy your enemy, it's to outlast them.